One of the devices that we have at our house is a Echo Show, which you can have whatever you Google. What that means is that it's Alexa, but with a TV screen on it. I have to say that the former senior warden got me addicted to this thing. So it's his fault that this is in the sermon. But each morning it gives me a news brief, which I like. As I'm preparing breakfast, it gives me reports from around the world, BBC, Reuters, etc. So I get a perspective of the world that I really don't get just by reading the local newspaper. And what I like about Reuters news is that when it gives me that news briefing, it also has pictures on the screen. And sometimes I take a moment to glance at the screen and see the picture that is depicted with the news briefing they're giving, whatever subject that is. And one particular morning, it was about immigration, and we know what a horrible, horrible subject that is for our country and how hard it is to deal with immigration. Each administration has a different tact on it. We accuse each administration of being too soft or too harsh. We don't really know what to do with all the people who gather at our borders and how to treat them well or what to do, period. But this one particular picture, as we're talking about the latest in gathering of people at our border, which are mostly teenagers now, had a picture of a young boy, Hispanic boy, who looked to be about 10 or 12, who was on the ground looking up at an immigration officer. The immigration officer has his hand out like this, and you can tell the immigration, it's a still picture, it's not a video, you can tell the immigration officer is talking to this young boy. And we can put into our own minds about what is happening in that scene, what is being said, what is being heard. But you can tell that the boy is hesitant. The immigration officer is trying to put forth a trusting presence, and the boy is trying to trust for himself, to decide for himself whether or not to trust this officer. And the officer is trying to get this boy to come with him for the boy's own safety. And I think that scene captured my imagination, not just because of the subject matter, which is intense, but because of my own grandson, who's 6 years old, when he comes to stay with us and sleeps over at night, has to have me sleep in his bed with him. And as he goes to sleep, he hugs me for a little bit. In the middle of the night, he reaches out to make sure I'm still in bed. In the morning, as he is awaking, he reaches out for me again and gives me a hug. It's all about trust. Are you there? Are you there for me? Are you going to stay there for me? Are you going to leave me in the middle of the night? Will you be there when I need you to be there? I think trust is at the bottom of most of our relationships. It's that center point that keeps us sane. Do we have somebody around us whom we can trust, who we can depend upon, who's going to be there when we need that person to be there? I recently saw part of Hulu's presentation of Joseph Heller's Catch-22, that book about World War II, and it's kind of a satire on war in a way. But the character in the Catch-22 on Hulu is a man called John Yossarian. And John Yossarian is a person who's not afraid, but he just wants to come out of the world, out of war alive. And he finds himself in all these different experiences, and he's shot down, he's wounded, and every time he thinks he has enough missions, this is a bombardier, and he's going up in these B-52s and he's sighting the bombs that are falling down, and as he comes back from each mission, he's checking them off, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and every time he thinks he has enough missions flown, the commander of the base raises the number of missions he has to fly. So he's caught in this trap. And all around him he sees war and destruction. And he's going really literally crazy in a way because of all the destruction and all the death. All his friends have basically died in the war. And suddenly new people are coming in, new recruits, new officers. And at first he keeps his distance from them. He doesn't want anything to do with them. But then as more come on, he begins to befriend them. And he tries to keep them safe. And he can't, because war is war. You can't keep anybody safe in war. And in this last scene of this series, another officer comes into his tent, a brand new recruit. And he comes into the tent and he asks if he's in the right place. And Yossarian says to him, yes, you are. And all he does in that last scene of this whole series is he stands up and he hugs this man. The only thing left this Yossarian has to give to another human being is his own humanity, his own acceptance, his own way of saying to that person, I have your back as much as I can. I'm here for you. That's what's being presented in this gospel today. It's just a vignette of the whole entire story. It happens because Nicodemus, a very devout Jewish man, comes to see Jesus in the middle of the night and basically asks Jesus, can I trust you? Can I trust you? Because if I trust you, that means on one hand, I have to let go of everything that I was taught as a kid, everything my mother and father taught me, everything that I have believed in as an elder in my faith. I've got to let go of a lot of that. And so if I can trust you, then that means I let go of that and I reach out for you. Are you going to be there for me? Are you really going to be the person that people say you are? Are you really going to be this kind of God for me who's going to help me through thick and thin and be there for me? Somebody I can trust. And Jesus then goes into this, in the Gospel of John, goes into this whole thing about being lifted up on a pole, just like from Numbers. God lifting him up on a pole. And we scratch our heads and say, what is this all about? And what Jesus is saying to Nicodemus and what John is saying to you and me is simple. It really is basically simple. I'm there for you. I'm always there for you. No matter what you face, no matter what you experience, I'm there for you. In my wife's office, she has one of these calendars. I think it came from Guidepost or something, which is wonderful, and each month there's a different scene, and I happen to go in. We have different offices. We think differently. She's very much an accountant. I'm very much flighty. And so I go into her office to get a check. I'm writing the check out. I look up at her bulletin board behind her desk, and there's a picture of this beautiful country cottage. And it's idyllic. It's ideal. It has flowers and a path and flower boxes, and you can just imagine yourself knocking at the door and somebody opening it up, and you get whatever refreshment you care to have. You'll be welcomed warmly. And over it is 1 Corinthians 12, God's grace is sufficient. And I looked at that and thought, wow, that's right, God's grace is sufficient. If I were in that picture, I would believe that wholeheartedly. But what if I'm not in that picture? What if I'm in the ICU ward? What if I'm fighting for my life? What if somebody whom I deeply loved has died? What if, just like dominoes went off in my mind, boop, 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 boop. Is God's grace sufficient then? Is God going to be for me then? Is he there in the deepest, darkest moments as well as the brightest, sunniest moments? And the answer of the day's gospel is yes. Yes. In our daily office of morning prayer, there's a prayer in there. And it says in part, Christ reached his hands out on the hard wood of the cross, so he may embrace. He stretched out his arms on the hard wood of the cross so that he might embrace the whole world. That's what the cross is about. Jesus is talking about lifting himself up on the cross to die that horrible, gruesome death so that you and I might know that we can forever trust God, and that Christ's arms embrace us all, And there's nothing you and I can do that can shake us from those arms. Oh yes, we're in the middle of Lent, and oh yes, we commit sins. Yes, we commit things that are wrong. There's no doubt about it. All we have to do is look within our own heart and soul, and we realize what we do wrong. There's this monk from the 4th century, 300s, Macarius of Egypt. I'm sure you all know about Macarius, right? That's part of your daily devotions. Macarius of Egypt, a Coptic Christian monk. No, you don't. But he wrote this: inside of us, the heart is but a small vessel. Yet dragons live there, and lions, and poisonous beasts, and all the treasures of evil. But inside that heart is God also. The angels, the life, the kingdom, the light, the apostles, the heavenly cities, and the treasures of grace. All things are inside your heart. How wonderfully true. And Jesus knew that as he said the words in today's gospel, and as he looked at Nicodemus, and he looks at us today, he knows that all things are in our heart, good and bad. And he died for all those things, all good and all bad. And he lifted himself up on that cross so that we might have the trust that whether we're good or bad, if it's a good day or a bad day, wherever we are in that whole process, Christ is there with you. He does not leave us behind. So on this beautiful sunny day in Edgefield, South Carolina, as we go about our business, let us go about our business knowing that we are truly loved and cared for by God, that we are who we are, for good and for bad, and that God knows who we are, for good or for bad. And yet, because of that, he loves us even more. If we don't know who to trust in these days or what to trust in, please remember, we can always trust in God, because he's always there for us, and God will never forsake us. Amen.